Now we're going to try a little exercise. Go ahead and empty your HTML in a practice page and add an image element and a button element. Okay, your image element should have a source, should have an alt, all that jazz. And put in an image of your choice. Currently I'm using external URLs. You can use external URLs or locally saved image files. That's fine, either way. And a button. And what I want you to try to do is create a button which, when you click on it, it changes the image. Okay? That's all. When you click on the button, it changes the image. So go ahead and stop the video here, pause the video here, do what you need to do, and give that a try. Try it first with just one image. Then try it so that the image continues to change. Maybe it cycles through 3 images. Can you make it repeat so that if it hits the 3rd image, the final image, and you click the button again, it reverts back to the first image? Can you do it with using external URLs for all your images and using locally sourced file, locally saved file paths? Give it a try. Pause the video, and after you've given it a try, successfully or unsuccessfully, come on back. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you have given it a try, and I'm going to go ahead and walk through the solution now. So we want something to happen when we click this button that causes this image to change, which means we're going to need an onClick attribute for this button to invoke a function. Let's call this function changeImage. Keep it simple. So now I need to jump into my JavaScript and define this function. Up here, I've got a variable called images, and all this is an array of 3 strings. There are 3 different images of beagles. 3 different images, 3 different strings in an array. That's all we're dealing with so far. But I'm going to define my changeImage function. There, it's declared, it's ready to go. Now all it needs is the code. So what do I want to happen when this function is invoked? Well, let me try writing some pseudocode. I want my image element to change. And now is a good point to ask yourself, what does it mean for the image in an image element to change to a different image? What does it mean in terms of HTML for an image file in an image element to be different? It means that I need to change the source attribute. I need to change the source attribute. So somehow I need to access image source and set it equal to new image. So that's just some pseudocode, some notes to myself. Good place to get started. First thing that I'm going to need to do is have an easy way to access my image element. Well, I want to keep things simple, so I'm just going to come back to HTML and give my image an ID. And I'm going to give this image an ID of beagle. And now I could access my image easily with document.getElementById beagle and do whatever I want to it. But let's keep things a little bit cleaner and put this in a variable. I'm going to create a dedicated variable that's just for my image. I'm going to call it image. Okay, so now anytime I write image, it's going to refer directly to the element with the ID of beagle. And what is the property which I want to access? It's the source. Well, I'm not sure, I'm not positive how to access an image source. So let's go ahead and try a couple things in my console. Let me first get rid of that, save, reload. And now in my console, if I type image, it does return the correct elements. So far so good. Now let's see if I can isolate the source property. I'm going to try image.source. Doesn't seem to work. If it worked, I should expect to see this http://cdn3 blah 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 returned to me, but it obviously didn't. So that doesn't work. That's not right. I could do some research and figure it out that way, but let me keep trying. What about image.src? That works. That returned a string which contains the address to my image. That's exactly what I want. That's perfect. Image.src. In fact, you guys should probably already know this from having successfully built the Zodiac apps. That was perhaps the most challenging part of the Zodiac app, is figuring out how to insert a dynamic image into an empty image element. So .src is how we can access the source property of this image element, and that source property is what we need to change when we click the button. So image.src, and it's going to be equal to something new. Well, let's just test it now. I'm going to just copy one of these different image addresses and paste it here. So when I click the button, it should switch to this image. Let's see if it works. And it does. Okay, we got a new image. The button works. If I click it again, nothing's going to happen, obviously, because the image is already has this source, so clicking it again is not going to do anything, but we're on the right track. Okay, if you made it here, awesome. Awesome, but I'm going to take this further and try to complicate this exercise even more. So as I said, up here I have an array of three different image addresses, 1, 2, 3. And I want to cycle from 1 to 3. I want, when you click the button once, it goes from the first image to the second image, and the second image to the third image. Okay? So how do I do that? Well, I'm going to start with some sort of counter variable equal to 0. And what I'm thinking is I'm going to set the value of image.source equal to some item at an index of the images array. Okay, so it might be equal to images 0, or images 1, or images 2 images. And that will sub in one of these strings as the source for my image element. Okay, but I want this number, this index, to be different every time I click change image. So I'm going to put in here this counter variable, and now the only thing that I need to happen is I need counter to increase by 1. That's to increase by 1 every time this function is run. Okay, so let's test this out. Click the button once, changes image. Click the button again, changes image. And then we get an error. The reason why we're getting errors is because counter is still increasing, and there is no third, fourth, fifth index of this gallery. So that's something that we might want to fix. And we can fix that with a quick if statement. If counter is greater than or equal to images.length, then we're going to reset counter. Counter equals 0. And just to test things out, I'm going to put a console.log counter inside this function so we can see what's happening. Click the button, we get a new image. Click the button again, another new image. Click the button again, and we're back to the first image. So that works. We have a cycling gallery of images. So far, so good. Okay. Now, real quickly, how would these external URLs be different if I needed to use locally saved images? Well, the only difference really would be that I would need to include the file path instead of these external URLs. So let's just give this a try real quick. Then we'll have one more step, and that'll be that. me go ahead and change the original image. Okay, so there's one. Click the button, jumps to the next. Click the button, jumps to the next. Back to the first one. Cycles through. Okay, so that works. So far, so good. Let me go back to the beagles, because they're more fun. And the final thing that I want to try is, we've gotten the image source to change whenever we click the button, right? But there's also an alt here. Every image, in order to remain accessible and in keeping with best practices, needs an alt attribute. Don't forget that. So what we might want to do is have the alt change as well whenever we change the source. We want to have the alt change as well. I mean, our alt is pretty generic with a beagle, such that it applies to all three images, but we want to try to change it anyway, because maybe all three images are not of the same subject. And we should always be thorough with our alt attributes. They are important. There are a couple different ways you can do that, but I'd suggest giving that a try. Pause the video here if you need to. If you want to try it on your own, it's definitely a good exercise. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and walk through the solution now. So the way I would go about changing the alt of the image is I would adjust this array of images from an array of 3 strings to instead, let me go ahead and comment it out, an array of 3 objects. 3 objects, and each object is going to have, let's call it path property. Actually, no, path property, and a description property. Okay, just like that. 1, 2, and 3. And I'm going to copy one of each of these image paths into the path property of each object. And then whatever we want in the alt, I'll put in the description. So for the first one, how about this is a beagle against a white backdrop. And then for the second one, this is Bronco the beagle. And for the third one, these are 2 beagle puppies in a field. Okay, so we now, instead of 3 images, 3 strings in an array, we have 3 objects. And each object has 2 properties, a path and a description. And these are going to correspond to our source and our alt for each state of our image. So now we need to adjust our function a little bit. All of this is fine. The counter logic still works. We can get rid of the console.log because we now know that that's still working. But we don't want the image source to be equal to images at the counter index anymore. Okay, because that's going to put an object in the source of that image element. We don't want that. We want the path of that object in the source of that image element. So all we need to do is tack onto this images at the counter index dot path. And then right below it, we want to do the exact same thing, except we want to do it to the alt attribute, and we want to insert the description property. So you might want to do some research, figure out how to access the alt attribute of an image, but let's just give it a quick try in the console. Image, it's the right element, so far so good. Image dot alt, and there we go. That does it for us, so that should work. Let's give it a try. Reload my page. So far so good. We're cycling through the images. Now let's inspect the image element and try to pay attention to the alt property. alt attribute, pardon me. So right now it says this is Bronco the Beagle. Then it says these are two beagle puppies in a field. Then it says this is a beagle against a white backdrop. Great, so it's working. It's working great. We've successfully dynamically updated the source and alt attributes of this image element every time the change image function is invoked, and that function is invoked by an onClick event on our button. Now let's try something a little radical here. I'm going to see if I can add that onClick event to the image element itself. So now we have no button, and if I click on the image, it still changes. Okay, so don't think an onClick event needs to be on a button element. It can be on anything. Still works. And we have an image gallery. The other advantage to the way we set this up, this if counter is greater than or equal to images.length, that images.length here, the length of the images array, means that we can add as many images to this cycle as we want, and the logic will still hold. It will still update correctly, and as we expect, it will never hit a dead end. There will never be a blank image as long as the file paths are valid, and we'll have a nice rotating image gallery.